Solvitur Ambulando, The Adventures of Steve and Dixie by Stephen Breakstone. Snippets from my journal. Episode 20. Intro. Over the years, I've been asked about my safety of living, literally, on the road, and my vulnerability to the bad, evil, and crazy people out there. The following journal entries address where my mind was at and the thoughts I had in that regard. In previous videos, I've already mentioned the warnings I had before I left New York, usually by people without actual experience, about not telling people outside of New York that I was Jewish. I also mentioned that the concern had become a non-issue, and in fact, that sharing of that tidbit with the people that we met often led to intelligent conversation and a deeper understanding between different Americans. I was 23 at the time of these entries, a young man feeling somewhat immortal, or, well, at least immune from most of the world's dangers, as long as I was somewhat careful. I wasn't ignorant, and actually, having grown up in New York, I was somewhat street smart, and I had also learned some karate and some self-defense techniques. Well, perhaps I was living in a bit of a fool's paradise, not unlike most people of that age, but in regard to my safety, I didn't feel especially vulnerable to the crazies. I also believed that good energy begets good energy, and Dixie and I were putting out nothing but good energy. I was in an idealistic mental place, and my real experiences were supporting these sentiments. I'll also state that I remember that even back then that I knew that good vibes going out was not a guarantee of good vibes coming in, but my philosophy, which I've nurtured and seen sprout and flourish, has served me quite well over the years. And within the confines of this belief system, I continue to spiritually express appreciation to the powers that be for the good vibes and good fortune that I've experienced. The following snippets provide some of what was going on in my mind up to what was still less than a year from leaving the safety and security of my family from ages 0 through 22. Enjoy. August 22nd, 1986, Friday, El Reno, Oklahoma. Oklahomans ask, "Where are you from?" To say New York is very incomplete. I often say, well, originally I'm from New York, but I started walking from New Orleans, where Dixie is from, and we're walking to Seattle on our way to Alaska. It's not very concise, but it is more complete and the information I think the questioners are wanting to know, which also helps to move the conversation along. Coming out of a pizza restaurant in a shopping center, two high school girls stopped us, and one asked me the official state question. She must have had an ape for a boyfriend. She was wearing a man's high school ring that was much too big for her petite hand and had a half an inch of tape wrapped around it just to keep it on her finger. The other girl was your average cute, Midwestern high school girl, but apparently, according to her fingers, she had no present, or at least serious, boyfriend. "Where are you from?" one of the girls inquired. I went through my rhetoric and added, "Right now we are headed north to Kansas and then turn west toward Colorado." "Are you a pervert?" Tarzan's girlfriend asked me. That was totally out of the blue and the wildest question I have ever been asked since leaving New York. "Well, that's a matter of opinion. I don't think so." "Do you rape little girls?" "No." "Do you stab people?" "No." "That's good. I guess you're not a pervert." I passed the test. Her friend agreed, and I was okay to talk to. I have absolutely no recollection of the rest of the conversation, but it was innocuous by comparison. I thought it very funny, and I laughed out loud thinking about it as Dixie and I continued down the road. I've considered that beyond the humor of that particular line of questioning, there is something else going on. Why would someone ask unprovoked questions like that? I have noticed that most of the people who engage me in conversation are older. Do they wonder the same things as the younger people? Did it just take the blatant honesty of youth to be asked those questions so directly? Perhaps youth is not as patient as age, and youngsters want to know right now about strangers, and age finds the answers through time and backdoor questions. Also, maybe age has the experience of knowing that most people are good and are trusting, but younger people have been programmed from protective adults to be wary of strangers. On the other hand, I thought kids were supposed to be more idealistic and trusting, and adults more jaded. I find these things interesting to think about. I think the broader question is, why does meeting a stranger begin with skepticism? Would it be better to assume that a stranger is sane until proven guilty? Well, at least most strangers. Is that too chancy? Is that what we've built in our modern, progressive, civilized society? It seems that everyone is scared. Why is that? Is it from reading too many newspapers and watching too much TV news? Are we programmed to fear everyone? Is this what we've built? Is this what we want? Is this pretty? Is this good? Or are we more like other animal species and have fear of strangers in common? Perhaps that is simply every species' natural survival instinct. Dixie is a very friendly dog and loves to have friends and to play. But every time she meets another dog, she takes a ready stance and her hackles rise. A few moments of sizing up the newcomer and a few sniffs, and Dixie knows what's what. The relationship then begins or doesn't. Side note, and I have no recollection of Dixie ever getting into a serious fight. Maybe I'm being a bit too judgmental of normal self protective behaviors. I think a little skepticism in life is safe, but to assume strangers around each corner are out to get you is negative and unproductive. I like to give the benefit of the doubt and let a person lose respect, then expect someone to be harmful and have to have him prove his worth. My way, I have the opportunity to allow more people and more love into my life. The other way is safer, of course, but only in a paranoid way. I don't have that paranoia or skepticism. I guess that's why I'm walking across America and all that it entails instead of staying home and dreaming of adventures. Of course, really, who knows what will happen to us down the road? I'm aware of the dangers. I'm no naive fool. I keep my eyes open. I know that there are crazies out there, but not around every turn. And I learn more and more each day that 98% of the people are good, decent folk. It's just the lousy 2% who get the press and give the rest a bad reputation. I've also considered that if the people who like to hurt or rob others see me and take a moment to think about it, I assume and hope that they will think twice about messing with someone who's about 6 feet tall and obviously in pretty good shape if he's carrying a giant pack on his back. I would think they would think that if he's walking, he also probably doesn't have too much money to steal, and well, they'd be right. I'm also carrying a hunting Rambo survival knife on the back of my backpack. And, of course, the bottom line is that if anyone really wants to mess with me, it's quite obvious that they'll also be messing with a German Shepherd. Enough said. Side note, my choice of choosing a larger dog to walk across the country with was an example of my awareness that there are crazies out there and that I was more vulnerable than the average person. And that the presence of a larger dog with a reputation of being protective would help keep the evildoers at bay. In a small town, not too long ago, a guy about my age asked me where I slept at night. I always get myself out of any town that I might be near, I said, and I sleep by rivers and lakes and streams and in the cornfields or with the cows or under a bridge or in the woods or behind haystacks and once even in a cemetery by a highway. There's always someplace. Well, you must not sleep very good. Why shouldn't I? I pretty much knew what he was getting at, but I wanted to play it out. I wanted to hear his exact inquisitiveness about how I could sleep somewhere different every night. You have no protection or security. You're just out there. Well, that's true, but it's always private. No one can find me because I make sure that I'm way out of sight. And let's face it, no one is expecting anyone to be sleeping in any of the places I bed down. And most importantly, I have a radar system set up. Awake or asleep, Dixie's ears are always up. I sleep fine. I could tell that he understood the words, but not the feeling. That comes with experience. He didn't give me the impression that I convinced him to leave his bedroom, or house. Side note, I remember that back then, I was fully aware that a violent person with a gun or a heavy foot on the gas pedal would easily overwhelm me or my German Shepherd. Again, it wasn't that I was ignorant or naive. It's just, well, simply put, it's just that I was more worried about and focused on other things that went through my mind, like adulthood. That was a concern. Also, I was usually surrounded by beautiful and or peaceful nature in every direction. I may have been hot or bored, I may have complained sometimes, but it was hard to maintain a red alert when feeling that you're just a part of nature, not looking at it from indoors. I was just a part of the landscape, the woods or the prairie and the clear blue sky, or the inspiring puffy clouded sky, and the incredible sunrises and sunsets. I mean, like every day. It was a hell of a reality. Later, my success and safety prove what I say about most people being good and the reality of life on the road being safe, as long as you take normal precautions and be aware. Then, loud as an atomic bomb, a killing spree in an Edmond, Oklahoma post office. Every news program of any sort around the country and in my backpack, conveniently via my tiny radio, had the story of a postal employee who came to work and shot dead 14 of his fellow employees and then himself. The press interviewed survivors, and they all said the man was quiet, a bit strange, and stayed to himself. But today, apparently no different than any other day, he flipped out. People have asked me if I'm worried about the crazies out there, and I said, I don't know. I haven't met any. Well, here is the other side of my idealistic perspective. 14 people with very stable lives and low risk jobs went to work in their very safe environment. They never had any reason to worry about the crazies or had at least felt somewhat safe from that vulnerability. And yet at work, a colleague, someone they knew, ended their life. It just goes to show the crazies can show up anywhere. And my lifestyle, while it is more at risk, also proves that worrying doesn't mean a thing. Fate can get you on the road or in your air conditioned office. And to not go out because of fear and to stay in to be safe is, well, it's just silly. It's not living. Okay, arguably I'm more vulnerable, but still, I think my point stands. I wonder how much negative publicity of a crazy person in Edmond will affect Dixie and me. Is that episode another reinforcement for people to be wary of this stranger on the road? Lots of people, since the Tvel van days, have been very kind and open to us. On the other hand, thousands more have passed us by. The press jump all over the massacre, but don't mention enough of the pleasant aspects of life and society. It's hard to tell if the press really controls us or we control the press. It's probably a vicious cycle. The press sells more news when it displays killing, rape, corruption, and scandals, and then we think hurtful behavior is the norm, and our minds are then brainwashed to think that that's what the world is like. On the other hand, if we didn't support that kind of rubbish, buying, reading, or watching it so much, the media wouldn't have any reason to continue to print it or to exploit it. So, who is responsible for our culture? The press or those who support it? The other day, after crossing back to our walking side of the Highway 81, after stopping at a small store for some refreshment, an Oklahoma Highway Patrol car driving towards us stopped and blocked our way. Out came Officer Darrell Hobbs, looking tough and large, especially as he put on his big old hat that gave him a powerful aura. I was stopped once by a state trooper in Louisiana and once in Texas, and I figured this was my Oklahoma stop. I also figured this would happen since a tragedy usually makes people more cautious, and this was a job for the police. It's not every day a guy's just walking up the highway refusing to take any rides, certainly not in the middle of summer. I chose to be especially sweet and friendly, and I made sure that Dixie was right by my side and not doing anything that can be considered ill-mannered or construed as threatening. I reached for my wallet and ID. As Officer Hobbs came closer, and before I could actually get out my identification, he said, No, put it away. I just wanted to say hello, stop, and, give you a couple of bucks. Excuse me? I wasn't expecting that, and I questioned if I heard right. Where you from? The Oklahomanism with a real Oklahoma drawl. That I did expect. I went through my story, and I added a bit more, saying, I guess I'm just looking for myself or my life, and, well, if nothing else, I'm just trying to see what part of the country I like best and where I'd like to settle someday. Aw, heck, you're in the best part of the country right now. Stay around these parts for 2 months and you'll never leave. Just love Oklahoma. Born and raised and lived here all my life. My granddaddy came for the 1893 land rush. People came from all over to line up, and the government handed out 160 acres to live on and farm. And until recently, all those acres were in my family. Wow. Now that is something for a New Yorker that just hard to relate to. There's got to be something special about land that is handed down from generation to generation, I said. Let me ask you, son, are you a Christian? He had the face of a tough and hardened professional law enforcement officer, but he had, from the moment we met and spoke, emitted a friendliness, really, that was as big as all outdoors. But I could also tell that he was a man set in his ways, and he gave me no reason to play games. I was raised in a Jewish household. Well, that's interesting. We don't have too many Jewish folk around here. We talked for just another couple of minutes about that and a few other things, and he had to get on his way. And then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a couple of single bills. Like I said, I saw you walking with that dog, and I wondered what you were doing and figured you could use a couple of bucks. Officer Darrell Hobbs handed me the money, and I appreciatively accepted it. He then leaned over, brim of his hat right at my forehead, his smiling yet powerful face in my face, and asked, "But you do believe in God, don't you?" "Sure do." Even if I didn't, I knew the answer had to be some sort of yes. And this was not the moment to start playing games with semantics. I'm not sure if we had exactly the same outlook of who or what God was, but we did, in fact, both believe in God. That was all that was important. At least at that moment, that's what was important to me. He kept his face right by mine, looking straight into my eyes, almost looking into my soul. It's important to believe in God. He created it all and takes care of it all, no matter if it be people or birds. He expanded just a bit on that concept, and I just listened. Then we shook hands, and he headed back to his patrol car. I reset myself and Dixie, so we had about an hour to walk before sunset and enjoyed the cooler evening air. As I thought of this experience, I considered that more newspapers spread the word of a disaster than of a friendly police officer helping out a traveler passing through his town. A simple story of one person learning another's ways and means. True, my story is not worthy of a headline, but it certainly is more pleasant than most news stories and better for mental health. In summation, over the years, I've reflected on the encounter with Officer Hobbs and considered that my initial perspective of that experience might be a bit naive. I wonder if the experience with police officers and some of the other people I met along the way who stopped me to talk would be different if I wasn't a clean-cut Caucasian male. I certainly mean no disrespect to Officer Hobbs or police officers in general, but I now know that I was too experienced back then to realize that I was perhaps, well, probably definitely, experiencing white privilege on this journey across America, possibly and probably to a much greater extent than I was ever aware of. Well, since then, I wondered what a single white woman or a non-white man or woman would experience on a similar journey. Now, that would be a story that I'd love to hear about. Now, that's it for now. Peace.